What's up, everybody? This is Siosi Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 66 of the It Will Come Show. Today, we're going to be talking about finding a job or starting a business online. And today's episode is sponsored by Faya, a parent company dedicated to bridging gaps between people and technology, one community at a time. From digital marketing to consulting, Faya helps progressive companies build communities around their brand, integrate emerging technology, and improve productivity. And with that, just going to share with you first a few links from the last 24 hours that have been certainly piquing my curiosity. And then we will dive into the question about, finding a job or starting a business online right now during this time of Corona. So here, the articles that I actually have above are related to 5G. Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, he's the author of this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it is in relation to jobs at this point in time and sort of the lack of financial education in general at schools. And then talking a little bit about an article that went out recently about Bitcoin halving, right? And I'll kind of weave in why that is connected to the other articles, and we'll then have a discussion about the jobs aspect. So here, this was kind of interesting. This video was I found on Twitter, and it talks about how I think France had asked China for a billion masks or something, and then China responded essentially, "We'll give you the billion masks if you Huawei, essentially. It's if you haven't heard of them, they are a phone company. I think they do more than just phones, but they're known for their phones. And they said they'd only give the masks if they adopted 5G from Huawei. And this is really interesting because, you're just seeing sort of the politics between nations and countries. You'd think that at this point in time, people would just be a little bit more altruistic and, share resources and whatnot. But you're seeing just sort of nature, human nature at its finest during these type of situations. And to be fair, right, if you're just looking at this from an opportunistic standpoint, what's happening here is not really unsurprising, if I'm honest, right? This is economics at play, unfortunately, and essentially, well, I won't put Huawei as representing all of China. Let's just say Huawei as a company, right? Instead of just saying all Chinese are bad, because essentially that's what this guy in this news report was saying. It's like, oh, now you know what the Chinese are like, and that is generalizing. So, this is just really fascinating to see, because obviously with sort of in the business world, right, there's a lot of stuff happening, and from people losing their jobs and businesses kind of going bankrupt, we are also starting to see power plays between nations and between companies that represent nations, right? Because they're just that big. So next up is this article from a guy named Robert Kiyosaki. Now, if you haven't heard of him before, he is the author of a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. And if you haven't heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's this book about essentially just teaching everybody the rules of money and the rules of finance, the real rules. Stuff that you often are not taught at school, and for good reason. So essentially, Robert Kiyosaki, he's becoming a lot more relevant at this point in time, because a lot of what he's been talking about since he first published Rich Dad Poor Dad is just really hitting home for people as they're losing their jobs right now. So he is known to be friends with Donald Trump. So whether you're a fan or not, this is pre-presidency. They both wrote a book called Why We Want You to Be Rich. And, putting politics aside, Robert Kiyosaki, I really do like what he has to say, because he is all about teaching people the truth about the rules behind money in general. And I remember when I first read his book, that's when I was just first exploring entrepreneurship in general. And, before I even knew what the word entrepreneurship was, right, the only career path I saw for myself was working for somebody else. I didn't know there was anything outside of that, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? Because, of course, every business has a business owner. But what we're taught at school is, and this is no fault to the education system itself, it's just sort of remnants of a time, right? The education system that we are familiar with was built during war times, or set up systematically that way to churn out worker bees. All right. So for those of you that are watching that were sort of drawn in by today's episode title, essentially right now at this point in time, if you're someone who's lost your job, it's a really good point in time to evaluate whether you go look for another job or actually consider starting your own business. And the reason why I put that as an option to you is because based on what you've been taught, or when you were going to school, have a think about whether you have some sort of entrepreneurial capabilities, right? If you are somebody who likes to solve problems, if you're somebody who likes to learn, and if you are somebody who likes, growing, then entrepreneurship might be a path for you. And if you haven't tried it out because you weren't simply aware, now might be a time to explore, right? I know for myself, my original career path was as an animator. I actually wanted to be an animator because I liked the creative aspect. I also liked the tech side, from video games to animated films on screen, and I really enjoyed seeing those two come together. But I never realized that business was a path that I could explore. And so I did. And, I haven't looked back since. So this is really a time, if you find yourself without a job, there's so much free information on the web. And of course, with that comes the trouble of having too many options and you don't know where to look. But Robert Kiyosaki is one of those teachers, in my point of view, who really does a good job of explaining how the world of money works in the background. And very simply, right? Because once you understand the basic fundamentals, the sky's the limit, right? So looking back here at this article, you can see Robert Kiyosaki. Some people might say he's a bit of a doom and gloom, but if you understand the context and if you understand his content from the past, this actually isn't that. It's not really doom and gloom. He's been warning people about this for a long time. He's all about, teaching people to fish. So here he talks about the death of the dollar. People desperate for money. Very sad. If government gives you free money, take it, yet spend it wisely. Do not save. And the reason why he says do not save is here. Lesson 5. Save money. Are you nuts? Why save money when QE Fed counterfeiting is printing trillions of fake dollars, $82 billion a month to $125 billion a day? Why save when ZIRP, zero interest policy, pays losers zero? Save gold god's money or Bitcoin people's money. Now, I'll talk more about the Bitcoin side, but in the past, throughout civilization, anytime a civilization has been on the brink of collapse, gold was usually sort of the store of value, the store of wealth that people would come back to. Even the Roman Empire, if you look at their history, when they were sort of nearing the end of their reign and their supreme power, what the Romans were starting to do is actually mixing gold and silver with other elements and diluting the actual value of the money pieces that they had, right? And this is when they sort of started to be able to, print money, right? And as a result of that, they actually had far-reaching consequences, because then the government started to also tax the people to death. And you just cannot tax yourself to wealth, right? And you can hear right now we are experiencing similar issues to the past, whereby we are seeing Americans and many other nations who are calling for more taxes. What they don't realize is that you cannot tax yourself to abundance or wealth in the future, right? And also, what Robert Kiyosaki talks about is that tax, if you can actually tax the wealthy even more so, because Robert Kiyosaki says they don't even pay taxes, right? And this is all legal, right? So you might be throwing your arms up in the air around like, tax the rich more. Yes, the rich do pay taxes, but they pay a lot less than the average person, and there is a reason for that. And Robert Kiyosaki actually explains how to do that for yourself. Instead of complaining and say tax the rich more when they don't even pay taxes, you're going to be taxing yourselves, right? Because the way that the incentive system works, and incentives are also part of the Bitcoin system, which we'll talk about maybe another day. You have to look at how the system is incentivized, how people in the system are incentivized, and learn the rules, then play that game. And obviously this game has very real consequences, right? Not denying that. But a lot of the times when people are, pointing fingers at people within the system, they are doing so because they just don't know the rules. It's like going to a I don't know, let's say a rugby match, right? And not knowing the rules that it's okay to tackle somebody else, and then throwing fingers at the players for fouling others because they went and tackled them, right? Like it just would make no sense. It's like that's part of the game. And so it's a very similar thing whereby because people don't know the rules, they throw their arms up in the air and say this is unfair, and it's just very important to learn the rules. So, anyways, if you haven't seen this article, if you haven't heard of Robert Kiyosaki, I highly recommend you go check him out. On YouTube, there's a lot of videos from him, and there's a lot of other guys that I'll share names for over the coming weeks. This one here, if you look here, this is kind of interesting. So just have a read of the captions, right?
Tax. So when all the guys are screaming taxed are rich, well, you can't tax them because they don't have jobs.
Right? So exactly what we were talking about. You can't tax the rich because they don't have jobs, right? Like they are the business owners and they understand the rules. And Robert Kiyosaki says, again, teach yourself the rules so you know how to play. And yeah, that's then your choice about whether you're going to do that or not. There are obviously a lot of injustices and a lot of things that I do agree are unfair, but it's about taking responsibility, and then being able to hold others accountable, because then once you know the rules, you can see where they're bending rules unfairly as well. So the next article that we have here. So this was actually just related to a podcast that we recently launched that Faya. So Faya launched a podcast called Faya Side, and the whole theme for the podcast is interviewing leaders, influencers, experts who are at the intersection of people and technology, right? Who are using technology to bridge the gaps between people and tech, and also just exploring that sort of interplay between the two. And so Calvin Ayre is a billionaire, and he is involved with a company called CoinGeek, has a mining company called Taal, so Taal, which I believe is named after the Filipino volcano, which actually also erupted earlier of this year. And this particular episode, just talks about his involvement in the Bitcoin world, specifically BSV, Bitcoin SV. And so if you're the first time watching this and you're not familiar with the fact that there's three sort of versions of Bitcoin out in the market right now: BTC, the one that most people are familiar with or trade with, BCH, also known as Bitcoin Cash, BSV, also known as Bitcoin SV. And the reason why I'm mentioning this to you right now is because coming up in the next couple of days, there is going to be something called a Bitcoin halving. What this means is, in the Bitcoin world, people who were mining Bitcoin, so there are these groups called miners who, just like in a gold mine, right? These miners actually mine Bitcoin, which is then used to distribute out to the rest of the digital world, right? And as a reward for mining these Bitcoin, or solving these problems that's part of the Bitcoin system, they get rewarded in Bitcoin, right? So what's going to happen in the next couple of days is these same groups, these same miners, there's something called a halving, which happens around 4 years. And as a result of that, the reward that they get for mining Bitcoin actually gets halved. So say, for example, I was a gold miner, Bitcoin miner, mining away or validating these transactions for people. And again, won't go into all the specifics yet if you're a beginner or just new to the Bitcoin ecosystem. But people who are mining away, say if they were getting paid 1 Bitcoin for every successful Bitcoin they mined, now it will be half a Bitcoin, right? And what this means is that it's going to make things very tight for people who are mining. So you might see a lot of companies go bust because they can't keep up. Two, that means you'll also see people starting to lose their jobs. So here is how this is relevant to today's episode. Bitcoin.com fires 50% of staff ahead of BCH halving. So, right, everything is let me share the screen with you. So everything is connected. So Bitcoin.com hires 50% of staff ahead of BCH halving. Bitcoin.com is owned by a guy named Roger Ver. He's always been kind to me. He's a good guy, but he is also a passionate supporter of BCH, which is Bitcoin Cash. There are some issues there at a fundamental level, but it is what it is. And essentially, before the BCH halving and all the Bitcoin halvings, they decided to let go of about 50% of their staff. So this is very, very interesting, right? So yeah, on the Bitcoin side, they're obviously experiencing, and it's very interesting, right? Because you don't really hear a lot of people talking about cryptocurrencies and what have you during this time, because most people are in survival mode. They're either looking at how can I make money, save money, or just survive, and that's what should be the focus right now. But with that, I will, continue to sort of share with you guys like why I'm so involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because it might seem a little bit at odds with things around community, which is what I've talked about for many years, and the importance of, and especially now at this point in time, communities are actually becoming very important for the survival of businesses, because it's kind of like the only thread, really, right? Beyond just having customers, but people actually helping each other out and having a culture with that. So, with that, I guess now we have to look at what is the and before I do that, actually, no, I'll share that after. But is it time to look for a new job, or is it time to start your own business? I think that's the question, and I would love to hear your responses to that, right? Just respond below sort of your answer in the comments, and I'll get back to you after the show is done. But, if you're somebody that's lost your job, are you currently on the lookout, for something new? And if you've always thought about starting your own business, now is probably the best time to do that. There are so many concessions happening, from governments to other businesses to free software and free learning resources, that there really is no excuse for you to do that right now. So what you decide to do is actually going to be a very, it's going to determine a lot, I feel, over the next couple of decades. So how do you want to set yourself up? Are you going to use this as an opportunity to forward yourself, to do the things you've always wanted to? Or are you going to allow the situation to dictate your happiness, right? And I'm hoping that you would far prefer to do the former. And so with that, I know that because I, wasn't very much aware, and I wish somebody had told me about entrepreneurship a lot earlier in my life. But if you're somebody who's been going to school and, doing okay, but, was very creative, maybe very outspoken, maybe even charismatic, right? Good at connecting people, good at pitching ideas or getting people and galvanizing groups of people, right? To work with you on ideas, then maybe, entrepreneurship might be something for you, right? Maybe starting a business might be a thing for you. Because with that, during this time, a lot of people are, of course, reining things in. So they're either letting go of people or just not wanting to spend. It's going to be a very weird time. But at the same time, there are other companies, especially tech companies, who are hiring. Right? So let me actually show you. This was actually kind of cool to see. Salesforce. So I believe Salesforce is hiring in droves right now. So have a look at this. Good news for the Bay Area. Tech hiring despite the coronavirus. So I know Salesforce and probably many other companies in Silicon Valley are, hiring in droves. And what are these ads? This is just annoying. Anyways, I'll close that. But yeah, Salesforce is actually hiring in droves at the moment, and they're doing a really cool thing whereby they're prioritizing friends and family of their current employees. So, taking care of, if you want to call them, right, their community. And I think this is a good strategy for now. Of course, a lot of people are going to be needing the help or wanting the help, but people are going to fall back on their own communities first, right? Because it's kind of that thing of, when a plane is crashing as well, right, falling from the sky. They always say, put your mask on first before helping others. And because we are in this sort of crisis situation, that's what people need to do. And so, with that, again, if you currently find yourself jobless, I want you to have a think. Do you want to actually find a new job, or do you actually want to start your own business? Because again, have a look at what the government is putting out in terms of incentives, loans, grants for people who are wanting to start new businesses, right? Because this is going to be a time where people are going to want jobs, right? And if you start a new business, you can hire people, okay? So I would love for you to be one of those folks. But if not as well, if you are still on the hunt for a job, I'm sharing this out to everybody. So the last time I was actually looking for a job, I documented my entire process. I remember I got bored at home, doing this on my own, so I turned my job hunting into a marketing campaign, and so and then just put that into an ebook. So if you're wanting to just learn from what I went through there, feel free to go to this URL at the top, drumroll.com/L/40 days. I'll put it in the comments below, and then use the code CoronaTime. So literally CoronaTime. And you can get it for free. Okay? So with that, as always, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart.